First things first, we're going to cover the Inferno today when we come back from spring break, and I hope that you get a chance to get away. But if you do get away, bring your books with you. You have reading to do. Yeah. I would suggest that you finish off the remainder of Dante, the Purgatorio and Paradiso, for when you come back. Okay? So we'll do them both in one day. That being said, how many of you have read the Inferno? Okay, this is the part of the Divine Comedy that's the most popular. For some reason, sin and sinners are really interesting, whereas it just becomes a little bit lacking in emotional valence as we move further on. When we get up to heaven, I mean, it's extraordinary. And when we get to actually the presence of God through Beatrice, that's really amazing too. The problem is that even for one of the 7 best poets in the world, as he modestly describes himself, it's a word from our sponsor. Right, that's a small commercial for Dante and how great he is. You know.
The worst part is that he was right.
Yeah, that's right. That's really irritating. You're right about that. That's horrible. I mean,
he's almost like Plato. He knew how good he was.
Yeah. Well, hold it. You can't be as good as at least some of the people we're reading, and not know it. All right. So yeah, he announces. Well, actually, he puts it in the mouth of pagan poets. Said, "What are you doing out there? You know, you're one of the greatest poets in the world." He said, "Yeah, but I'm on my way to heaven. Can't stay. You guys stay here. Look, you're lucky I put you here. I could have tossed you anywhere." All right, so I gave you a break. Right. Even weirder, when we read the Purgatorio, not only is Virgil out in the Inferno, but Cato, the Roman Stoic, is wailing on everybody in Purgatory. And he does a damn good job of it. Why? Because Stoics are detail-oriented. Right? Stoics are really interested in their duty. He doesn't know why he was taken out of the first circle of hell, apparently, but God has a job for him, and look, no Stoic is going to say no to Yahweh. All right, you want me to wail on people? There's nobody better suited to that than me. I'm a Stoic. And if these people need a good flogging to keep climbing the mountain of purgatory, well, I'm your man. All right? Now, there are so many weird, heterodox things in here, in the Divine Comedy. In some ways, it's amazing that this ever made it past the church censors. And actually, a number of high-ranking church officials, when they first got this, said, well, the problem is that this has precious little to do with Christianity or Catholicism. In other words, how did Virgil get out of his box? In other words, who gave him the job of moving through hell? I don't know. And how did Cato get sent somewhere else? Redeployed? I don't know. In heaven, we're going to find the odd Muslim, which is really weird. All right. Here in the first circle of hell, we have Saladin, who's not a poet or a philosopher. He's a religious and political ruler. But he gets in the first circle too, along with Avicenna and Averroes, both of whom I think are genuinely great philosophers. But the key thing here, well, it's true, actually. I think it's a fair observation. First circle of hell is loaded with Greeks and Romans and Muslims, and my sense is it probably has a fair number of people who regard themselves as Christians. Right, I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case at all. I mean, for example, I can't imagine, look, if Kierkegaard is in heaven, I don't want to go. Right? No. If he makes it in, I gotta be somewhere else. You know, because don't tell me that I have to share eternity with this. No. That's just not acceptable. So I figure Kierkegaard's in the first circle of heaven. Right? God said, look, I can't figure out whether I'm supposed to punish you or not for being whatever it is you are. Right? But I figure I'll toss you in here and we'll see what happens. Maybe another poet will come through and draft you. You know, I don't know. Right. Yeah, I've actually wrote down at some length, because just as a kind of pleasant hobby of mine, what it would be like to take a short journey through the first circle of hell. Who do you meet there and what are they doing? You see that Plato walking the philosophical dog. Because it knows what it knows and doesn't know what it doesn't know. The dog makes it into, I think dogs go to heaven. Maybe they go to the first circle of hell too, I don't know. All right, some dogs are wiser than people.
It's true.
That's a fact, I know, yeah. It really tells you something. All right, what do you think of the Inferno? Come on, you're supposed to think something. Yeah.
I'm always impressed by, I don't know if impressed is the right word, amused in a not so pleasant way by how intensely involved Dante is in the politics of his day.
Yeah, okay. Late medieval Italy is a rat's nest of political intrigue, backstabbing, double-crossing, triple-crossing. I mean, there's a reason why Machiavelli ends up the way that he does, right? I mean, he was born innocent as a baby and then turned into Machiavelli. He saw some stuff going on in politics, particularly in Florence, where he was born, and Machiavelli ends up in a bitter party dispute between the Blues and the Greens, and it turned the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, and he ends up on the wrong side, gets captured, ends up being tortured for information. And this, for Machiavelli, is a breakthrough. He said, this is a sign that politics are failing. Why? Because I'm on the rack. So the idea then is that you should avoid the rack. And the way you avoid the rack is by avoid being double-crossed or triple-crossed. Get them before they get you. Medieval Italian politics and early modern Italian politics is a mess. It's broken up into various city-states with their surrounding countryside. There are 5 or 6 of them. And they're always making war on each other. And because some of these states are weaker than others, the weak ones like to invite in foreign help in the form of troops from the King of Spain or the King of France, right, who become de facto both kingmakers and pope makers in Italian politics. All right, so he is very involved in politics, and he learned something about human nature. All right. Yeah.
I think it was so funny how like calm the sinners feel in heaven. Like when he approaches them, one guy in Canada says, "Why do you bother me?" Like he has something better to do than talk to him. He's getting tortured there, and he's like, "Why are you bothering me?"
Okay,
yeah. Something better.
Also, why did God give any of these people a break from being tortured?
Right.
Right. I mean, stop for an interview. What? I mean, if you stop to think about it, you're really pushing the envelope of, how can I put it, dubious credibility, yeah?
The thing that really opened up the whole commedia for me was someone pointed out to me that the whole thing is a journey of internal transformation for
Right.
Dante.
Right.
He starts out, you see it at the very beginning, he's associated with the wolf of incontinence.
Mm-hmm.
And when he meets the people in the pit of lust, he faints because I think because he sees that this is where I should be.
Okay.
And he can't quite deal with the fact that he deserves that punishment.
Okay, yeah. He swoons at opportune times in this journey. Note the journey motif, it's back. All right, everybody's going somewhere. And, you ready for this? The city is like the man. And what that means is all of humanity is encapsulated in this journey from hell to purgatory to heaven. Everybody's there someplace. Pick your level. All right? And the universe is a giant hierarchy because that's the medieval view of the world. Everything has its own little niche appointed by God. But you get to choose your niche in the afterlife, depending on how you act here. But simultaneously, not only is it a trip through all of human history and all of human existence, it's also a trip internal, all right? And this internal trip is a journey through your own soul. every evil that you encounter in the Inferno, you could possibly do. Penance of every description, as a result, is possibly due from you in purgatory. And the place in which, in the Paradiso, where you end up after you pay for your sins, is dependent upon, again, the kind of life that you choose. All right? Yeah.
That's one thing I was kind of confused about is, in some way or another, I feel like we've all experienced some type of these sins. So is it more of a fact that that was their like main sin and it was just a habit of their personality at that point? Or because
I don't know. I mean, things like theft and murder seem remarkably consistent. In other words, we do them, they did them. It doesn't seem very different to me.
Yeah. So how come like all the sinners, it seems like they're just there for one sin, but they could be in there for all.
When you go to hell, you get counted on your worst sin. What's the really bad thing you did? All right. Same sort of deal, apparently, when you go to heaven. The best of your actions are what determine whether you get up close to God or whether you have to sit in the bleachers. Now, fortunately, in heaven, everyone that's got the cheap seats, none of them rebel, none of them object to this because God is dishing out the seating arrangements. He can't be wrong. And besides, you're in heaven, so there's no discord there. So you just sit there saying, I belong in the bleachers. Right, and that's where they stay. All right? There's a remarkable lack of dissension. Or I guess it's not remarkable given that it's heaven. Okay, what else? Yeah.
I just have a question. So in one of the circles of hell, I think it was the sixth one with Pharisee, he meets a pope.
Yes.
But I was doing some reading, and some scholars say that he meant to mention the Byzantine emperor. Is that
He might
valid?
have. In other words, yeah. There's how can I put it? A replication of names between certain popes and the current Byzantine emperor. He doesn't like the Byzantine emperor because none of the Italians like the Byzantine Empire because the Byzantine Empire is adding a surcharge. Remember, the Italian city-states, for the most part, live through trade. For all of Max Weber's brilliance, he didn't understand that there was plenty of capitalism in late medieval Italian Catholic city-states. You don't have to work, you don't have to wait around for Protestantism to get the work ethic or to get capitalism. They both exist prior to that. All right? Now, because of that, Florence and Rome, but also Genoa, Venice, are trading centers, right? And the Byzantine Empire impedes that because they're taking a slice of the pie off the trade with the Muslims. So Byzantium is not popular here. It's part of the reason why Roman Catholicism won't go to the aid of Byzantium when they're besieged by the Turks. Turks are sitting there for 7 years, right? And they're in the process of building the world's largest cannon. And they send out more than once before the fall of Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire and the Byzantine Patriarch sent info to Rome saying, look, we'll rejoin Rome, we'll undo the schism, but come out and help us out. And the Romans were not willing to go. The church was not willing to go. I know. Look, one of the things I object to in the contemporary world is the fact that everything, or a vast number of things, get blamed upon the church, which are really not the church's fault. And the reason why it pisses me off is because it obscures the things that really were the church's fault. Where they totally messed this up. Right? I mean, the church is the source of our misogyny. No, it's not. You're an idiot. On the other hand, the church bears a great deal of responsibility for the emergence of Protestantism. Yeah, that's true. That's a fact. Right? They could have fixed this 200 years earlier, and they chose not to. 200 years is not a timely response to a crisis. I know that the Holy Spirit has plenty of patience, but I don't. All right, I want things taken care of. All right, so they seriously mucked up the Reformation of glaring evils in the church in the 1300s, around the time this was written. All right, at the councils of Pisa and Constance. They could have taken care of simony, So you can't buy offices. They could have taken care of nepotism. They could have taken care of selling indulgence. None of them do. Why? Because it hits too close to home. So they solve the papacy crisis, but they don't address the other stuff that damn well needed to be addressed. Instead, they try to keep the lid on by killing, imprisoning, and then killing heretical would-be reformers like Huss and Wycliffe. But the problem is that that's the Roman response, all right, to a problem. And in the long run, that's not going to work because your repression is not going to be perfect. Thus, Luther. So look, much of the Reformation is, Luther is blameworthy for it. But not all of it. There's plenty of blame to go around when people mess up this badly and create a needless schism within Western Christianity. But what's done is done. All right. The church also, astonishingly, made a mess of the Galileo affair. Don't tell me that this was a good idea. I know that there are all kinds of excuses, but there's all kinds of explanations, but there's really no excuse for this, right? They were in lockdown mode because of the rise of the Reformation. And new ideas are Protestantism. No, actually, that's not the case. I mean, I just can't help you with that. The behavior of the planet Jupiter has nothing to do with Luther. Has nothing to do with Protestantism, has nothing to do with schismatic Christianity. But the church finally lifted the ban on Galileo in 1992. Once again, this is not my idea of a timely response. I mean, it's not like we went 300 years where everybody said, I wonder if the Church of Galileo is right. No, there's really not much of a question there, I'm afraid. And they could have figured this out actually pretty quickly because the church was heavily involved in astronomy. We had good scientists on the payroll, yeah.
One thing I do appreciate, though, is that compared with some modern states like Japan, who to this day deny their involvement in horrible evils, the church decided in the 1900s to do a categorical look at all the things that have done wrong and apologize.
That's a good thing. No, that's a very good thing. But in addition to apologies, we need that firm purpose of amendment. You've probably heard about this, right? Well, when I look at something like an ongoing pedophilia scandal that's older than I am, all right, I think that a firm purpose of amendment is very important. I want to see that. But I want to see results. And I don't want to see them in the year 2300. I want to see them now. Because what you're doing is squandering the moral witness of Christianity and undermining religion by providing safe haven for child abusers. I mean, there's no mitigating circumstance to sexually taking advantage of a child. I mean, if they were involved with adults, I would disapprove of it. I wouldn't condone it because they've taken vows of celibacy. But at least I would have some understanding of it. Look, all of you know what sexual desire is like, and you know that it can push you around and people can fall to it. With adults, it's one thing. With children, it's an abuse of trust that's not quite unforgivable, but damn close. All right? And I don't want to wait 200 years to fix this.
Ninth circle of hell.
What?
It's the ninth circle of hell.
Yeah. Well, again, those who are treacherous, all right, are the worst of the worst. And I have to think there's some truth in that, actually. The journey through hell is a journey marked by an increasing intensity of sin. All right? And it would be important to understand what a sin is. Sin is misplaced love. In other words, sin is love of the wrong things. What you're supposed to love is God. And if you love God, and He's the primary thing that you love through life, you end up going to the paradise, paradisium. But everybody that loves something other than God is misusing their love. This is an interesting question, but it's something very much worth thinking about. What's the best thing that can happen to someone? That they should love the right things. All right. If you love something else, sex, money, heroin, pick your poison, what that means is that you will devote your actions, your life, and your intentions towards the thing that you love that isn't God. The further removed it is from God, the worse the transgression. Right. Okay, yeah.
In a way, this is the insight at the bottom of philosophy, love of wisdom.
Okay, yeah, provided you don't personify God, right? But yeah, the form of the good is like there's that crystal of God. Yeah.
I was just gonna wonder why he separates like wrath and violence, because in the circle where wrath is, aren't they fighting each other?
Yeah, anger, all right, rage or the desire to hurt is a precursor, but not as bad as actually killing somebody. Okay, and as we go down, we're going to encounter different kinds of sin. The first set, the kind of, can I put the better sections of hell, right, are of concupiscence, lust, greed, gluttony, what's the other one? Avarice, all right, and wrath. At the very bottom of these, the first portion. Then below that, we're going to get heresy and violence. Note the numerology. It is not an accident that heresy ends up on the 6th level. Biblical numerology, 6 is the number of evil. They got to go there. Okay. Violence turns out to have all kinds of gradations within it, and it has to do with what you're being violent towards. And again, there's another gradation, a whole set of niches, nested inside each other. In some ways, hell, or actually the whole of the Divine Comedy, are like 3 Matryoshka dolls. They go inside one another. All right. We go from the biggest and most general of the sins, lust, which is everybody's favorite. You lie. I don't believe that for a minute. Oh, no, not me. What the hell do you want? He thinks the gentleman doth protest. All right. Yeah, I won't digress here, but my point is, we're going to start with lust. And the reason why lust is the best of the deadly sins is because human beings are made in God's image. When Paolo falls in love with Francesca and vice versa, they are departing from the love of God, but what they love is much more similar to God than, say, the avaricious or the treacherous or the angry. All right? All right. So, how does it start? We're in a dark wood. There's actually a technical term for this dark wood. It's called the dark night of the soul. Petrarch, a rough contemporary of Dante, writes about it in a book called the Sacratum. It's when you fall back on your spiritual resources and they're just not enough. We're in a dark wood. Sooner or later, everybody's life leads them to a dark wood, to some low point where they have to do a gut check. They have to figure out who they are and what they are.
In the opening line, it doesn't necessarily say midway through my life, it says midway through our life.
That's right. That's right.
Somewhere in the middle of all of our lives, we find ourselves in the middle of the dark.
Sooner or later, we're going to find ourselves in a very dark place. And we're going to not feel the presence of God. What do we do? Well, swoon. Okay, but what he does is have Virgil pop in and lead him through this, and actually catch him at the various times that he swoons, just moves him along. Virgil is often viewed as being natural human rationality or wisdom. Some truth in that. Also, can you see how it's handy when you're reading important books to know who the hell Virgil is and why? Remember, that was the template for Augustine, and now he's the guide. Remember, the Aeneid is the template for Augustine's Confessions, and now he's the guide through hell, yeah.
It's kind of astonishing the change that's happened since Augustine. It's been about 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And in Augustine's day, Virgil was an opponent who he had to deal with as an opponent to Christianity. But for
Hold Virgil, right? I'm sorry.
Augustine for Virgil,
Right,
was,
yeah.
Virgil was an opponent.
Right.
But Augustine couldn't help himself from drawing on him because he was so beautiful. But for Dante, he's like, you can come into the Christian setting. We can use you.
Yeah, I mean, join me and the other 5. Yeah.
What is the particular reason for Virgil
Um,
being died?
I think that that Dante regards him as one of the greatest poets that ever lived, and that this poet is particularly useful because of the journey motif. We need somebody to get us through. You know?
He's also the one who gave us the best account of a descent into hell that has been given so far.
Okay, yeah, right. We have that. He does have the journey to the underworld.
Oh, right. And it can't be Odysseus, though, because he had the same
Could be
thing.
Odysseus, but Odysseus is a nasty piece of work because he's a lying essay.
I was confused by that, though.
Yeah.
Is he?
So Dante does not have access to Homer. He only knows of Odysseus.
He's heard of Homer.
Yeah, he only knows of Odysseus from all the other authors, and interestingly, Homer is the only author who viewed Odysseus as a good guy. Everyone else saw him as this lying SOB.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, he's the guy that came up with the Trojan horse. And, of course, what that means is that they gained by stealth what they could not gain by violence.
Okay.
All right? So he is a treacherous individual.
Okay.
All right. All right, so we are in the dark night of the soul, and the advance is threatened by 3 animals, the lion, the leopard, and the wolf. These represent concupiscence, violence, and treachery. All right, 3 kinds of sin. And outside of the gates of hell, God doesn't even let the, how can I put it, the neutrals in. In other words, if you're given a choice in life between obeying God and doing whatever it is that pops into your head, obeying God is not intermittent. All right, you have to do it all the time. It demands your whole heart and soul. Those that never made a commitment to religion, even though they had the opportunity, they get pushed around outside the walls of the city of Dis. All right, and they're buffeted by storms forever. Okay, we notice the gate. Abandon all hope, ye who enter. I've often thought of putting that at the front of my syllabus. And letting you figure out what the literary reference is as time goes by. Yeah.
He is a descent into hell.
What can I say? It is if you're doing it right. Okay, yeah.
There is paradise on the other side, though. So.
Yeah, okay, well, but none of us are guaranteed that. So keep reading. All right. That being said, we come to the first circle of hell. Here, nobody gets tortured, has anything really awful done to them. Why? Because these are the men who live the life, I guess, and women too, who live the life of natural reason. And that's sufficient to keep you from doing, damnable sins. The problem is, until you accept Jesus, you don't get any further than hell. All right? So this is God's justice. He says, look, I couldn't expect you to have accepted Jesus because, for example, you lived centuries before him. All right? And you live by the light of natural reason, which means you're a tiny fragment of humanity. All right? But you guys have won the prize. You get to hang around together, talk with each other. Right? And the only thing you lack is hope. Yeah. That's actually a pretty powerful message. What's so funny, Paul? You're starting to worry me.
They don't have hope because they had to abandon it before they entered the gate.
Yeah, but they didn't have any choice about entering the gate. They got
yeah.
kicked into it. Yeah.
That's actually it's a good point, because the whole point for Dante, all this is hope and love are the 2 central themes of the entire thing.
Right. That's certainly true. But you have to remember that 99.9% of all the people that God created prior to Jesus, they're someplace else in hell. And God knew before he created them that they were going there, since they can't accept Jesus because it doesn't exist. Yeah.
This is one of the very interesting things to me about the Inferno is all of us struggle with the idea of hell.
Yeah.
It seems unjust, it seems hard, and we all often try to lessen the idea of hell and maybe say there aren't that many people down there. But Dante's going to have none of that. He's going to say, no, it's real and it's really rough.
Okay, it is certainly real. It is certainly really rough. The idea that there aren't that many people down there strikes me as being a wholly inadequate response, because you don't want God actually tossing anybody who doesn't deserve to be there in there. And apparently, there are people there who had no chance, no alternative. Okay. And then how does one of the Muslim leaders end up in the Paradisio? I mean, look, there's a whole bunch of heterodox stuff here. In other words, sometimes people try and sell the idea that this is scholasticism rendered poetic. I reply, that is impossible. Scholasticism is intrinsically not poetic. There's nothing I can do with it. All right. If you find Albertus Magnus poetic, all right, you have some kind of problem. Duns Scotus is not poetic. No one has ever been transported the way they are with Plato by Albert the Great. I mean, I'm sorry, but that just doesn't work. Yeah.
That being said, Dante did read very carefully, especially the works of Aquinas.
Of course he did, yeah.
And a lot of that theology makes its way into here, especially with the influence.
Yeah, but a lot of all kinds of other weird stuff makes its way in. And Aquinas would have said, what's a Muslim doing up there? And shut up. I'm in charge of this poem. And there's all kinds of stuff that's neither biblical nor Catholic. I mean, nor just completely imaginative. All right? And we're on very thin ice here. A number of high-ranking church officials, cardinals and archbishops, when they first saw this, said, we got to ban this because this is irreligious. I mean, whatever this is, it's not the religion of Catholicism. All right. On the other hand, a number of Italian cardinals really liked it, and they obstructed legislation, right, and prevented the Divine Comedy from being destroyed. All right. Note that this is being written in vernacular Italian. It's not in Latin for scholars. Okay, and that's a big deal. That's a good sign of the waning of the Middle Ages when we move from Latin to vernacular. Dante is one of those bridges between the late Middle Ages and the early Renaissance. I mean, the hierarchical structure of the world, that's clearly medieval. All right. On the other hand, all these Greeks and Romans that have been let loose to do stuff in his poem, I don't know. That seems to me like a revival of the Greco-Roman culture that we call the Renaissance. Characteristic of the Renaissance is vernacular literature, for example. All right. So he's a kind of amphibian. He's between the late Middle Ages and the early Renaissance. All right. So we go to the first circle of hell. We see all these pagan philosophers philosophizing, I suppose. Okay. Next, section 2, lust. Like I said, everybody's favorite. Okay. We see Paolo and Francesca. And what we get told is a really mournful story. Right. Paolo and Francesca fell in love, but it was a forbidden love. And this moral transgression is a damnable transgression, but it's the best of the damnable transgressions. Yeah.
We read parts of this in my public school education, and I remember my public school friends reading this and going, why are they in hell?
Oh, I can explain that. Francesca is married to Paolo's brother. How do you think this is going to turn out? Okay. Paolo's brother catches them, kills them both, which is how they ended up in the first circle of hell, first circle of punishment, second circle of hell. And then Paolo's brother, because he's a murderer, ends up in 6. All right? But look, this is something that happens in human life. People develop sexual attractions for things that they should really leave alone. come on, you've lived long enough to know that's certainly the case, yes.
I just have a hypothetical question.
Yeah,
So if you paid somebody to kill somebody else,
Yeah.
would you still end up in the circle?
oh yeah, because you're the one who causes it. In other words, it's not the head of the mafia, not just mafia hitmen, are murderers.
That makes sense.
Okay. Paolo and Francesca are reading a book. All right? It's one of the chivalric romances where Lancelot and Guinevere, who's married to King Arthur, also do something quite similar. All right? And as Dante puts it so delicately, they read up to that point because they were reading together. They closed the book. That day they read no more. Okay. In comes Paolo's brother, Francesca's husband, who is upset. He kills them both. All right. Well, they didn't have a chance to repent their sins. Down you go. But we've reserved a kind of nice area for you compared to the other stuff that people are going to get, because as transgressions go, this is the best of them. Okay. From there we go to gluttony, avarice, and wrath. All right. What we're doing is going through the 7 deadly sins. All right. And the further down you go, the more the object of your love is improper. All right. Then we get into the city center of hell. All right. That's where we're going to have heresy and violence. Heresy because the 6th level is just the place for heresy. And 7, because there's so many different kinds of violence, is going to give us concentric rings within that. This is hierarchy within hierarchy within hierarchy. So there's violence against your neighbor, which is murder, against yourself, which is suicide, against God, which is blasphemy, against nature, which is sodomy, and against art, which is usury. Now you may wonder, why are usury and counterfeiting against art? The medieval idea was that usury was an evil because money doesn't produce anything. So if I charge you 10% interest for a year's use of my $1 million, at the end of that I expect $1,100,000. But as scholastics like St. Thomas say, this is impermissible theft because that $1 million didn't actually produce anything. So what you're doing is skimming off the cream from the art that was used in creating whatever they did with that $1 million. Okay, same sort of thing. Here's the deal. The people that actually, say, built a building for $1 million, right? That belongs to them, right? Because they're the ones who did the work. The fact that they needed an advance in money to get, say, lumber and nails and stuff, that is not part of the productive process.
So what if you didn't charge them? If
you didn't charge them interest, that would be fine. That's what you need to do. But the problem is that that is a real primitive conception of economics.
no one would lend money if they didn't get interest.
Well, no, they do sometimes, but it's only because out of the goodness of their heart. And you really can't count on that. But also, even more important, far more important actually, is that interest, like all price, right, fluctuates. And what price is a signal. It's information to producers telling them whether they should produce more or produce less. Right? The price of your commodity goes up, produce more. If the price of your commodity goes down, produce less. Right? Well, no, that's why planned socialist economies don't work, because they don't have the price mechanism. So they can't figure out how to efficiently allocate capital. That's the problem. All right? The efficient allocation of capital requires that we devote that capital, that we give that capital to the activity that's going to produce the greatest return. Okay, the activity that's going to produce the greatest return is willing to pay the highest level of interest. Why? Well, because if you're making an 80% profit, paying 8% or 10% on the $1 million is no big deal. But if you don't have that, then the person with the $1 million has to figure out arbitrarily who they're going to lend this to for no interest. And what that means is that this money does not go to the most productive new endeavor. It goes to, your brother-in-law, or you just keep it and say, I'm not taking any risk with my money at all. All right? So the efficient allocation of capital is based upon the price of money. And the price of money is called the rate of interest. Okay? So medieval economics is real primitive. All right? And that's why lending money at interest is actually not a moral evil. I mean, being extortionate towards it, and threatening to break people's legs if they don't pay it back, that's immoral.
A lot of modern credit card companies are
Pretty close to it. Well, again, it's hard to know. We don't have one, again, we can't get all platonic though. Exactly 30.4%, right? That doesn't work, all right? But we have this Aristotelian spectrum where things are moving in the direction of usury, when they're charging at 29%. All right. So we now end up in the second level. We've got heresy and violence, and the violence is against all kinds of things, your neighbor, yourself, God, nature. The wood of the suicides is particularly moving, right, where you cut the trees and they bleed and stuff like that. It's a beautiful image. And then we get into the final two sections. Note that 3s and 9s are going to be really important in this book. There's a lot of numerology. There are 100 cantos overall in the entire Commedia. Each of them gets 33, except the last one, which is when we end up with God, who turns out to be light. It's hard to do a detailed portrait of God or a detailed characterization of God, since language breaks down and we find out that it's light, or that it's really glorious light, it's kind of divine light. If that explains anything at all. No. Again, you're reaching with the limits of what language can do. All right. Fraud. There are lots of frauds, and they also have a hierarchy like everything else here. Pimps, seducers, flatterers, simoniacs, those that bought church offices, sorcerers. This is something really medieval. It's very clear that he believes that sorcerers are real, and for that matter, so does the Bible. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. They were witches, and he killed them. Okay. Remember that, is it Saul that goes to the witch at Endor and conjures up Samuel's ghost? Okay, conjuring up ghosts is unusual stuff. I don't know, as far as I know, that's one of the parts that most Christians just pass over in silence. We don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about Jephthah's daughter either, right? But who knows? This is a rat's nest, all right? So fraud, we get sorcerers, but then below that, those who corrupt politics, hypocrites, thieves, fraudulent speech. And under fraudulent speech, we get such people as Ulysses and Mohammed. I was waiting to see when we were going to get Mohammed. I suspected that he was going to be at the very pit of hell, but no, you can get worse than that. It's worse than fraudulent speech. Below this level of fraud is treachery. And that's as bad as it gets. All right? Treachery involves doing harm in return, or where you should do good. We have an immediate and particular obligation to do good. So there are 4 levels of treachery. The first is Cain, or named after Cain. Why? You have obligations to your kin and to your family. You're not supposed to murder them. And this is a fact of natural law. It is not a question of positive law. Remember that Cain kills Abel in Exodus, but they haven't gotten the 5th commandment yet, thou shalt not kill, because, Cain kills Abel in Genesis, but the next book, Exodus, is where we get the 10 commandments. But Cain still gets that mark of Cain and is morally guilty because he's supposed to know that he's not supposed to kill his brother. All right? Okay, so this is an unnatural kind of malice. All right. Antenor, he's a Greek that betrayed his country. So betraying your country is even worse than betraying your family. I don't know, that's dicey too, I don't know. Below that, Ptolemaica, based upon Ptolemy. He's in the first book of Maccabees, right, in the Bible. Judas Maccabeus and is Ptolemy's father-in-law. He has Judas Maccabeus and Judas's sons come for a dinner, and he poisons them all. Yeah. You're not supposed to do that. No, this is an offense against Xenia. This is an offense against the rules of hospitality, which were established many thousands of years ago, that you're supposed to protect rather than kill your guests. Yeah, that's a big deal.
It's interesting that that's worse. The country is worse than kin, but guests is worse than country.
Right, because it's something that this is an even more foundational kind of transgression. And then the very bottom of hell. Though this is named after Judas, and this contains those who repaid good with evil. In other words, those who harmed their own benefactors. And yeah, I mean, I can see how that would be, in a way, the ultimate possible evil. All right? Returning good for good and evil for evil is a kind of natural human impulse. Returning good for evil is a Christian impulse. Returning evil for good is the inverse of Christianity, yeah.
Jordan Peterson, who's a figure I really appreciate.
Yeah, I like him too.
Points out, he thinks that Dante got it absolutely right when he said the treachery is at the bottom, because not just on the side of the treacherous, but people who are betrayed, it absolutely rips the rug out from their whole world.
That's right.
And it's the worst thing that can happen to you is for someone betrayed.
And it is the last thing in the world that you would expect, because you have to be really twisted to think, someone that's done nothing but good to me and been kind to me my whole life, I think I'll betray them and cause their downfall. Well, what can we say about that? There's really no extenuating circumstance here, yeah?
Could you argue that Caesar did good for them his whole life, or was he more looking out for his own
Oh,
interests?
okay. You could argue that with Caesar. There's a particular case with Brutus. All right. Brutus is one of the guys, along with Judas Iscariot, that ends up in the bottom of hell, being eaten by those 3 heads of Satan. Okay. Caesar was an ambitious politician who was in the process of, in practice, ending the Roman Republic and creating the Roman Empire. Caesar is a synonym for emperor. Okay. Brutus was a Roman politician who was interested in the greater glory of Rome, but also interested in political morality. And he, like other Roman patricians, had an interest in keeping the status quo. All right? The Republic is maybe in bad shape, which it was, because it had grown too big to actually manage what was a de facto empire. But also, in the civil wars leading up, prior to the murder of Caesar, Brutus and Caesar had been on different sides. Brutus had been captured by Caesar's troops. And they brought him to Caesar's tent, and he said, look, take an oath of fidelity, and I'll spare your life.
Right.
Okay. You evil son of a bitch.
And then
You're actually going to kill me now for political reasons? I mean, you couldn't say to remember, there were a dozen conspirators. 11 would have killed him too. All right? Doesn't make any difference. So why did you say, you know what? I'm going to be the first to stab Caesar, because after all, he and I are so close. We're like brothers. He actually gave me my life for which I owe nothing except my dagger.
The three people being chewed on like Satan, it's Judas, Brutus, and Cassius.
Yeah.
Okay.
Same sort of thing, same sort of Roman, Cassius was another one spared by Caesar. Okay? It shows you that there's something to Stalin's idea of just kill them all. All right? Because he knew that politics is not a domain in which you can reasonably expect gratitude. Everything is, what have you done for me lately? You know?
Yeah, people don't forget past wrongs for recent rights.
Funny you should mention that, yes, yeah.
I think Dante also, living in a politically disunified Italy, sort of, not just sort of, but had a real romantic view of the Roman Empire as this united thing that was centered in Caesar, and Caesar was inherently.
Well, it's a hell of a lot better than what we have now with all these city-states fighting one another and bringing in foreign armies, yeah. That's what Machiavelli's going to be so exercised about. But it's not only people forgetting past benefits, it's remembering current wrongs. Caesar hasn't done any wrong to Brutus, right? You know, he's in the process of ending the Roman Republic, which ends anyway, another generation later. But Brutus says, no, political ideology is more important than personal connections of benevolence and indebtedness, yeah.
I find it really interesting how Dante describes entering the final ring, or the final layer of hell. He says, I did not die, nor did I stay alive. Like, imagine if you came when I became, if I was deprived of either state.
Yeah, okay. Here's the deal. The bottom of hell is perfectly silent. It's also, strangely enough, really cold. Now that's strange because there's nothing in the Bible about hell being cold. Right? Actually, hell is described as cold in the Quran.
Oh.
That's why it was seen as treacherous, or that's why they thought his teachings are heretical, probably.
You know, there's no shortage of religiously dubious elements here. But the cold hell, that's actually Quranic. Who knows where he dredged that? You know?
It kind of referenced that Satan was suffering down in hell. Is that the case?
Oh yeah, everybody's suffering, but the down in hell, it's frozen, so you can't move, you're immobile. But you're conscious. And if you've ever been cold, the idea of, say, being naked and frozen in a block of ice, all right, that kind of cold that you can't shiver, it goes right to the marrow, all right, and it really hurts, and there's nothing you can do about it. The reason why it's cold is because love is warm. Right. So it's dark, it's silent, it's static, except for three-headed Satan, who most of his body is locked up, but he's gnawing on these three bad guys. Right, so each of the heads. By the way, this three-headed Satan is a diabolical inverse of the Trinity. Right. Yeah.
The very last canto of the Inferno, one of the most chilling scenes to me, he encounters someone frozen in the pit of hell, who he says, are you dead? I thought I saw you back in light just a little bit ago. And he says, oh no, my body's still up there and moving, but I've so committed myself to Satan that my soul is already down here.
Yeah, that's a theologically interesting thought.
Is that just basically like selling your soul to the devil? Is what he was...
That's the idea.
I don't know. Whatever it is, I think that it's incompatible with Catholic Catholicism or Christianity in general. I mean, I know God's efficient, but judging people before they die, I mean, that's a bit much. Right? I mean, assuming that he has free will and can repent, and I think that that's built into the psychology of Christianity. What's he doing down here? Dante doesn't like it. In you go. Remember that in the Sistine Chapel, the people in hell are all people that Michelangelo doesn't like, including his landlord. All right? So again, you can have some liberties with this. Yeah.
What about the one clergyman or who complained about
Ugolino.
Yeah, who complained about the nudity, and so he's the only person whose genitals are hidden.
Yeah.
And not only are his genitals hidden, but there's a snake with 2 rings around him, which signifies that he's in Dante's second. He's in the pit of lust.
There we go. Well done. This is a kind of harrowing journey. All right. It plays fast and loose with religion. All right. I mean, it's obviously central, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that, I can see why the contemporary churchmen reading this saying, what is this? I mean, this is going to lead people astray. But the Italian cardinals came back and said, this is really good poetry. We read it in the original. We really like this. So, I mean, it stays. And they ultimately decided that it stays, even though, how can I put this? It's an innovative theology behind this,
I'm just really curious. What was his inspiration for writing this? Was it like a dream, or did he really believe that this was like what hell was like?
He claimed at various points in his life that he actually went on this journey spiritually. And there's no way that we can know for sure.
Right.
But there's some people who are said, I wonder if he's right.
Yeah.
This is the Pilgrim's Progress. The journey motif is back once again. All right. Your journey through life is a journey towards your ultimate niche in this gigantic 100-canto construction. Everybody belongs somewhere in there, and you get to decide it. All right. There's a great deal of imagination, and sometimes I'd have to call it heretical claims that get made in this, or assumptions that get made. It's still a great piece of literature. All right. And it shows the medieval outlook in the sense that everything is hierarchical, but it also shows that we're having a new influx of these Greek and Roman ideas, which is why Romans get liberated to be his guides, right? And then finally, so his guide here is Virgil, the next guide is going to be Cato, right, because he's in charge, and then Beatrice is going to lead him upwards into the Paradiso. In other words, his chaste love of his beloved Beatrice is what leads him upward. Think of the last line in Goethe's Faust, the eternal feminine leads us aloft. That's one way of looking at it. And Beatrice, like Laura for Petrarch, is a woman that's married to someone else that he's only seen once in his life. But it transfixed him. And her face became the image of godliness leading us upward toward a pure, chaste love that reflects the love of God. Remember what we read in the Symposium? All right. So what you see in your beloved is, in fact, a vision of eternity.
Beatrice not only is Petrarchan, but she participates in a tradition that goes all the way back to the Symposium.
Yeah, all the way back to the Symposium with a couple of digressions like Dido.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, babe. Gotta go. Okay. So, what do we got here? We got the structure of all of human life, and it's also the structure of all of human history. All right? We're all being judged by the same universal set of rules. Love is what animates the universe, what animates us, which is a very interesting thought. It's love that pushes the planets and stars around. So the problem of human life is to figure out how to love the right things. In other words, you need to make your love orderly. And you're allowed to love people or books or dogs or what have you, but you're not allowed to love them more than you love God. And all the things that you love must be arranged hierarchically in case there's ever any conflicting demands, you know what you're supposed to do. Okay? Now, this journey is set I mean, he writes it it takes him 12 or 15 years to write. But this journey is set on it begins Holy Thursday, that's the dark night of the wood, of 1300. Right? No doubt there's important numerology going on there. I just don't know how to unpack it. Right? Everything in this has lots of biblical numerology. By the end, we go through Easter Sunday and to the resurrection of God, and this is it's a spiritual, but also a symbolic temporal journey. Right? We're going to have to go through the betrayal and passion of Christ to get to the resurrection. And we are also going to have to engage in transformations in order to get to our resurrection. Okay, now the idea within the Inferno is that the punishment should fit the crime. So there's a definite correspondence between why you're in hell and the kind of torment you have to undergo. Soothsayers, for example, have their heads turned backward because they're not allowed to look in front of them anymore. Okay. My sense is that saying sooth probably doesn't get you damned for all time. You know, that compared to the treacherous, doesn't seem like much of a problem. For that matter, to the avaricious. You know. Our understanding of good and evil are in some ways different from his. Right? For example, there's no place here for people that drive slow in the fast lane. Right, whereas clearly there has to be some such level. It just hasn't been invented.
No, that'd be treachery.
No, they don't have the wit to be treacherous. They're 90 years old, and it's 1954, and they don't know how to get out of the fast lane. God, there's so many octogenarians allowed to drive around here. It drives me crazy. Right, I like to get where I'm going. All right, yeah.
Where does sloth?
Sloth. Oh boy, that's a hard one.
It's actually in Wrath.
In Wrath. Okay, yeah.
It's related.
Related. I don't know. In other words, look. There are some pointed, sensible questions that don't actually work out all that well, right? But it works for the poem. And besides, what can you do to the slothful except have them sit? You know, are they never allowed to lie down, or they always have to work? I don't know what to do with the slothful. It's not really poetic. Sloth and its opposite are not gripping to the imagination. Right? So I don't know. I'm sure that if we were to organize the list of human transgressions, we might create an order different from this. You know?
The really interesting thing to me is that for most criminal justice is oriented around the idea that violence is the worst crime that you can do. Direct violence against another person is the worst crime, with the possible exception of treason to your country. But for Dante, fraud is worse than violence. Lying to people, deceiving people is worse than killing them.
Okay, yeah, because you're going to kill them, but first you have to deceive them, all right? Whereas somebody that's violent, like, say, Paolo's brother, there are at least some cases in which someone becomes overwhelmed with emotion, and we usually hold that not to be anything but murder, but we hold it to be a lesser degree of murder. All right, we don't get many of those gradations here, all right? Also, remember that all of these sins are potentially recoverable. In other words, you can repent, all right? But if you don't, you get the appropriate punishment for your sin, all right? Now, all of us need to work on our souls, and the next phase, the next 33 cantos, are going to allow us to do that, all right? We are going to be climbing the arduous Mount Purgatory. Now remember that you have to imagine Dante's view of the world. At the very bottom of the world is the entrance to hell. When you work up, you're actually working in. When you get out of the ninth circle of hell, you're actually at the base, the other side of the world, of Mount Penance, or whatever it is, Mount Purgatory. You climb up there, well, Cato, who is an only too obliging prison guard, because he's a Roman Stoic who really knows how to keep things orderly. Everybody's trudging up there, paying for their sins. You know?
The view is that when Satan fell, he slammed into the earth, pushing all this dirt, creating the pit of hell, and the earth was pushed out the other side to form Mount Purgatory.
Okay, I mean, you gotta like that.
So how is hell the center of the earth?
So he views the earth as a sphere. The pit goes all the way to the center of the earth, and it pushed out dirt on the other side to form the Mount Purgatory.
Okay, and then heaven is.
Having you.
Then you step off the earth altogether, then you enter the various realms of the sky.
So he fell.
All right.
Pushed it.
And these will correspond to the moon and the sun and the planets. Eventually we get to the Empyrean realm, where we get the perfectly developed Christians. And then we step outside that, and we meet God himself. It turns out, though, that there's really not all that much to say about meeting God himself. It's not that it isn't a unique and very worthwhile experience. It's just that we don't have words to talk about it. So what amazes me is that he's actually able to give us a 100th canto at all. All right. Most people don't find it very satisfactory. Most people don't regard the Purgatorio and the Paradiso as nearly as moving or as interesting as the Inferno. And I think there's some justice in that, actually. But this is the pessimistic view of human nature that we got in Augustine. Prior to getting an infusion of God's grace, you're at the mercy of nature. If you're that 1 in a million that's really rational, we can give you a suite up here in the first circle of hell. Apart from that, you're damned for all time and you deserve it. All right. Why? Well, because you chose evil. Suppose you didn't choose it. Well, if you didn't choose it, you were an infant or something, I guess we can send you to limbo. Yeah.
There's a point in the Paradiso where Dante makes it clear that his view is that no one is in hell who does not deserve to be there.
That's right. That's right. That's certainly the case. Right? And God is merciful, which is why we have a heavy population in purgatory. Right? Questions about this? This is important because, A, it's that epic tradition that I've been talking about. Well, it's back. And now, we don't just have Greek and Roman epics, we now have a Christian epic. A couple of centuries later, we're going to have another Christian epic. This is the Catholic epic. That'll be the Protestant epic. It's Paradise Lost. All right? And then we'll get the general Western epic, which is of dubious religiosity, in Goethe's Faust. That's the last of the great epics in the Western tradition. The reason why Faust is late 1700s and then finishes when he's 80 in 1832. So there's about a 50-year hiatus between the first and second halves of Faust. But this Faust is not primarily religious, although it has some religious overtones. Religion is less of a concern than the journey of the soul in this world from despair to activity that justifies human life. Right? It's a rather pagan, or it's a kind of a combination Christian-pagan epic. And it's the epic of Western man. In other words, I am the universal knower. All right? I am Faust, I'm really smart. Yeah.
Are we going to read Milton and Faust?
No, we're not doing Milton. You should, but I just, there's a little bit. But Faust we are going to.
Okay, good.
Okay, that's important. Let me think. What we're going to get in, the reason why Faust gets written so late, why it's the last great Western epic, is because Germany was destroyed by the wars of the Reformation. So it started the Enlightenment very late and restarted high culture very late. And so you get Enlightenment figures like Kant, who are contemporaries with Romantics like Goethe or Schiller. And the Epic of Faust is really interesting. It begins with this discussion in heaven between God and Satan, all right, which is stolen from the book of Job. All right? And Satan comes down, and I really like comparative devils. I think that's kind of an interesting thing. And Goethe's Satan is actually quite an interesting fellow. He shows up first as a black dog. All right. Then he shows up as Mephistopheles. And it's interesting. Faust asks him who he is, and he says, I am the spirit which negates. In other words, I am the no of the universe. And that's actually quite a very interesting statement. And what's very important is that in the second part, after we start with God and Satan in heaven, next we go to Faust's study. And in his study, he is contemplating suicide. Why? Because he has studied all there is to study and knows all there is to know, and it isn't enough. In other words, Greece isn't going to help you. And the Mephistopheles hasn't shown up yet. What saves him from committing suicide before the advent of Mephistopheles? It's Easter Sunday. The bells of Easter recall him to himself, right? Which is actually a beautiful, powerful line saying, look, I've done this Greek thing, and it's impressive, and the Romans are impressive too, but by itself, it's just not enough. All right. In other words, if you want to avoid despair, you're going to have to go back to Jerusalem. Okay? That's the last great epic in the Western tradition, in the sense that epic is a written or an oral literary composition. Later on in the 20th century, we'll get a new set of epics. These epics are all going to be films. We change genre. Why? Because we have Science 4.0. And so we're going to start doing epics in a different way. All right? The universal technological epic is 2001, A Space Odyssey. It's the journey from us, from being pre-rational to being rational, to getting beyond rationality. All right? We start our rationality the way Cain and Abel started it. Bone to the head. Remember that? Okay. Flips up, we find ourselves in the middle of the Cold War. In other words, this is where the development of weapons has left us. We're on the brink of destruction, but then we're going to get the star baby and all that Hegelian stuff. All right? Yeah?
Just out of curiosity, is Lord of the Rings
Yep.
in the same genre as the epic?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't find it as moving or as powerful as things like Faust or Dante. All right. I think it's a nice read, but I haven't read it since I was in high school. It doesn't interest me that much, and it becomes kind of predictable, and for that reason, doesn't hold my attention all that long. Yeah.
My sense of the Lord of the Rings is, first of all, I have a personal liking for it, but on a more objective level, I think Tolkien is one of the few modern authors who actually has his roots in the classical tradition, and as such, people are like, whoa, this is really good stuff.
Okay.
Partly because they just don't have exposure to the classical tradition.
I'd be tempted to say that everyone is immersed in the classical tradition. There are a small number, like Tolkien, that know it.
Yes.
Right? And the rest of them are being pushed around by forces they don't recognize or understand.
I should say that Tolkien is consciously
Yeah,
part of
that's
the
right.
tradition.
So he knows what he's doing, and that's why, Aslan seems so much like Jesus and stuff. But other writers are actually working in that tradition, but aren't fully conscious of it. The ones that I cover mostly are, like Joyce. Right? He knows that he's breaking away from Christianity. So one of the arguments that I'll make is that epic is a surprisingly ubiquitous form. It gets destroyed, but then it comes back. It starts out as an oral tradition, then gets turned into a written tradition by Virgil. Then once it's a written tradition, it gets turned, that continues on through Faust, all right? And after that, it becomes a visual tradition. That's what motion pictures are. All right. Think of something like Gone with the Wind. That's an epic of nostalgia for a lost innocence for the Old South. All right. For those who identify as Southerners, this is their tradition and their diaspora. They are the Trojans of American history. And same sort of thing with Lily Riefenstahl's Nazi film, Triumph of the Will, about Hitler's greatness and these vast Nazi rallies which show you that the folk are behind him. And that's an epic too. I might be tempted to say that late 19th century opera, particularly Wagner, is reaching towards epic, certainly with the Ring cycle. So epic is gone, but it's also here to stay. Just keeps getting reformulated, yeah?
Are there 18th century novels which participate in this tradition?
Yes, the best of them, the most obvious of them, is Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe is the Enlightenment everyman, and since ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, and the city is like the man, his progress on the island, which is nature, is based upon his belief in God and his rationality. And he steals from the ship a whole bunch of stuff, like hammers and nails and stuff. That's the Western tradition. So what he does is go through the entire Western tradition. Starts out looking for food, eventually goes to agriculture, domesticates animals, eventually sees Friday, kills most of the brown-skinned people on account of the fact that they're cannibals. Friday spontaneously wants to become his butler. So he says, okay, and then eventually we're going to get Europeans who are going to come, and among them is a Spaniard, and he's going to extend religious toleration to him. Okay, what this is all of human history pretending to be a novel about a castaway. Robinson Crusoe is all of humanity. This is the history of the world from the view of the Enlightenment. 1730, it's right on schedule. All right, here's the deal. Have some fun on spring break, but not too much fun. All right? I don't want somebody being called to bail you out. That being said, enjoy yourself, but do some reading. Reading is good for you, and I want you to get in the habit. Aristotle was right about habits. I'm in the habit of telling you to read all the time. And you should be in the habit of reading all the time. All right? You two gentlemen come up to my office, and I will talk to you. We're going to read the Purgatory and Paradiso. You can do the whole things if you want, but there are sections that I chose out, and I will see you in 10 days or so. All right, bye-bye.